And welcome back, students. We're going to today discuss touch-ups. And just to be fair, we have both a woman and a man here that we're going to touch up on because obviously both genders get heavily touched up on in magazines or online publications or anything. So let's start first with the lady here. We're going to do our old unlocking of the layer. And what I'm going to do to start off, I'm going to go ahead and start just by zooming in just a little bit here. And you can see as we look at this image, there's several things of how these different techniques happen. For example, her hair has all these little flyaways that we can clean up here. We can clean up any imperfections or blemishes in her skin. We'll be able to also do some lighting and contrast that we'll do there. On the man, we look over here. You can see that we have some stubble that we could clean up here, really eliminate any of this neck beard action going on here. We could also change the contrast and stuff on his face. So let's go ahead and start here. So gentlemen first. And let's go ahead and look at our tools that we have. Now we've looked at the patch tool before. And now with the patch tool, let me just zoom in a little bit. With the patch tool, if you recall what that does, if I select an area, all that does is pretty much allows me to move that around. Now while the patch tool can be handy, the problem with the patch tool is that even though it does that, it doesn't necessarily work the best, right? And I'm just going to unlock my layers just to be sure. So when I move that down there, it does kind of fill it in. But the only issue that we're going to run into is that it does kind of make it a little bit blurry. Now we do have other tools at our disposal besides the patch tool. We also have such as the content aware move tool. So I can move that, and I can move content. So I can move that piece around, but I don't really want to do so much of moving that as I may want to get rid of something else. So I'm just going to do Alt-Control-Z. We're going to instead look at the spot healing brush and the healing brush tool. So let's start first with the healing brush tool. And with the healing brush tool, let me unclick that selection there. Go back to that. With the healing brush tool, if I start trying to do it, you see it says I'll click to find a source point because we have to tell Photoshop where to start looking in order to clean something up. So when I hold down the Alt key, it's saying, hey, Photoshop, look in this area to pull sample text or sample image, excuse me, of this data I want. I want this kind of this clean area of his neck here. So I'm just going to click right there. And I'm going to actually decrease my brushstroke size. And you can see if I drag it over the blue area, you can see it has kind of that tone there, the skin. As I start doing that, you can see it will actually start painting over the areas that he has. Now, the one downside is that as I do that, you will notice that it doesn't quite work perfect, right? Because it does kind of leave some smudging. Now, we can, of course, use the spot healing brush tool, which we have worked before. Right? And that one I can just go ahead and click, and Photoshop will pull information from the surrounding pixels in order to best fill some information in. Now this of course has its strengths and weaknesses, right? Because for example, if I try to pull too large of an area, you can see that it does also kind of blur that as well. So I can of course just do a big swatch across that, and you see it actually will pull in some extraneous information there that may not be interesting. So I might just want to do things, and for example, I say click, and of course I can adjust my brush size to try and make that a little more pronounced. But again, you have to be careful because it may try to pull information from down here. Like these shadows you see are somewhat bleeding in here. So we don't want to make sure that we get those in there. Now, once we are satisfied with the information that we've done here, you see it makes a nice big swatch there. So I'm just going to actually decrease my brushstroke size. So I want smaller pieces of information to be used in creating this. I want to try and trim up his beard here so that way it's a little bit more uniform. And the only issue that I start running into is that we have all this shadowing going on here. And so that can actually create some weird artifacting. And so I then may want to switch back to something such as the patch tool to really pull in some of this information over here. So however you do that, that's up to you. So I'm just going to trace along his jawline a little bit here. And if I try to move that, I can pull that down just a little bit. You see it's not a perfect option, but it does work to an extent. Okay. Once we're satisfied though, let's go ahead and work on some of these other areas. Like we might see there's a couple areas on his face that we want to do. So let's go ahead and grab the spot filling brush again, and we can go ahead and just start working on those layers. Now you notice it's not doing anything because I still have a selection down here. So I need to click off of that selection, which is the marquee tool there, and go back. And I should be able to start using this brush to kind of clean up his face a little bit. Now, one thing I will notice is that his face is also kind of dark, especially on this side. So what I'm going to actually do is go in and apply some filters. So let's Control 0. And let's go down here to Filters. And we want to increase this so that I can make it a little bit more bright. Now, there's, of course, multiple things I can do with it. I have brightness, contrast, exposure. Now, there are photo filters that you can do. And when I did a photo filter, the first thing you notice when I did that is that it immediately brightened up the image. So if I go Control Z, do a photo filter, you can see it gave some warmth to the color because this is a warming filter. All right, and there's pre-built-in filters here. So for example, I can do like a red filter, which gives kind of more of a red tinge. I can do more of a blue filter, which gives it more of a blue tinge. And of course, I can choose different warming filters that I want to look at. Each one will have slightly different effects upon the image, like a cooling filter, you notice gives a lot more blues. I can also, of course, choose other ones, like here's my underwater filter. For now, let's just go ahead and leave this as a warming filter because we want that image to look a little bit warmer there. Now, of course, we can add multiple filters. We're not simply just limited to one filter or another. So, for example, I can mess around with the color balance. Maybe I want a little bit more reds in there or I want a little less reds. I just have to be careful when I start messing around with these that I don't make the image too imbalanced one way or another. Color balance is not really one that necessarily benefits this image right now, so I'm just actually going to delete that. Instead, I want to kind of brighten that image up just a little bit because you got a little bit of shadowing going on this side. All right, now if I just crank the brightness all the way up, you can see his face, the whole image is being brightened. And what we can actually do is we can actually go into our brush tool here and create a mask here to specifically target this side of his face. So I'm going to increase that brush size there just a little bit. And what I'm going to do is just kind of take that and paint over it. Now, if I paint over it, you can see nothing is happening because I haven't really cranked up. If I crank up, you can see that is what's happening now. So if we start painting over this, we can see we're getting the side of his face. Now, we don't want this side of his face to be darkened. However, what I can do instead is if I want this to be the area that's not darkened, all I have to do is, let's go ahead and crank that brightness up, get that area off of there. And what we're going to do is then darken the rest of the image, which is a perfectly viable thing. Or, if we want, we can use, for example, the lasso tool here. Trace around the areas that we want to be brightened up in order to make a selection. And then what we can do is then take this selection. We can, for example, inverse it or deselect it. And I can effect then set this image back. Inverse selection. So now we have everything but this area darkened. And I can actually take that brush tool, that's the selection tool, brush tool, and if I try to paint over this area, you can see that it actually doesn't do anything here. However, if I try to paint over the other areas, it will do something there. So if I crank that up, you see everything else is darkened, but that area is not. So if I really want to do this really quickly, I can make my brush size really huge with a single click. And now when I go ahead and bring the brush size back down, and let's just click off that, you can can see that we have this one area that's really bright. Now, of course, that doesn't mesh very well, so you'd have to mess around with your settings in there to really truly make it one big, beautiful image. Now, if we wanted to say, like, this layer is just too much and I just want to mess around with it, we can do that as well. But for now, let's just go ahead and add a little brightness and contrast in here, just to increase the brightness of this image a little bit. Now, you notice this layer mask is still giving me some trouble, so I'm just going to delete it. And I can just actually add a new one. I can delete this old one. Let's go back here. So we want to increase the brightness just a little bit. And there goes some nice good quality here. Now let's go back here to the woman and let's take care of these flyaways in here. So for this, I'm going to actually zoom in just a little bit, do a Control+. And to get rid of these flyaways, we can do this several ways. All right, we can do layer masking, we can do all sorts of different techniques, but for now, they were focusing solely on using things such as the spot healing brush. All right, so when I have that tool selected, if I go ahead and try to click on it, it says no layers are selected because I didn't actually click on this layer. Now it's clicked. So as I start clicking on this, you can see as I start running the brush over here, it actually starts removing those flyaways. So then her hair is now constricted to exactly where her hair is, and it takes away a lot of these flyaways here. So it just kind of removes those away from there, making it look a lot kind of cleaner in its presentation. Now you just have to be careful because I noticed I did a big swatch there, and you can see it grabbed more information from around the area than what I necessarily wanted. Just make sure when you do this, again, make sure you're using a soft brush tool, as if you use a harder one, you're going to end up having a lot rougher kind of cut around the edges here, and it may not necessarily look as good. So this way, when I trace along the edge here, it kind of cleans it up really nicely. And of course, we do the same thing here. Just have to be careful we don't grab too much information. I'm going to just do a couple strokes there just to kind of fully eliminate the information that we don't want. If you ever get too much in there, you can just Control Z, and sometimes you can't do big strokes right away. You have to do little strokes first to eliminate these smaller flyaways. And you can see as I do this, it's actually filling in her hair with pieces of the canvas around. So you just have to be cautious as you start just doing big strokes because it may actually add information that doesn't necessarily exist there. Like right here, you can see it's kind of making a little knotty. So I might actually have to first come in here and just take smaller pieces of information first before I go ahead and try to smooth it all out. And if that doesn't work, you just have to adjust your brush size, which looks like this might be the case for right here. Let you go ahead and finish that though on your own. So let's just go ahead and keep eliminating pieces out here. Once you have all the hair though cleaned up to satisfactory needs, then you can focus on other areas of the portrait. So for example, let's just say we want to remove this small mole here. You could go ahead and click that, and Photoshop will remove that. Now you do notice that it'll take away some of the curvature of her face, so you may again have to adjust your brush size to kind of more target that area there to kind of soften it up. All right, and again, same thing as before, we can come in here and we can do different selections in here to help change the brightness and contrast. So I'm going to grab the quick selection tool here, and I'm just going to kind of drag it over her face. Because maybe I want to brighten up her face here. So now with that selection, let's go ahead and do some vibrance. If you notice, if I do a quick selection on her face and I do vibrance on it, you may not be able to see how this changes, but if I move the saturation, you can see that it's only affecting the layer that I have. So, that in mind, let's go ahead and just back this up and remove this layer, and we're going to actually add in a new layer. So let's do vibrance again. And this time let's do a quick selection of pretty much her entire skin area here. Okay. So we want her, we're going to take the vibrance, we're going to put that up just a little bit. And we're going to take the saturation, we're going to actually increase it just a little bit to really help bleed those colors. They don't want to go too much. Right? And you can see this starts affecting her hair and stuff too. Right? So those areas are good. And if I don't want her hair to be selected, as I start cranking up these saturation values, if I go up here to inverse, I can actually then just, with that selected, or I can use my paintbrush tool, and I can actually paint through those areas. Those are quick and easy ways that you can do that. Now let's say you wanted to change the color tone of this area. So let's just go ahead and add in, let's do a hue saturation. And we're going to go ahead and with the hue saturation, if we go ahead and just try to manipulate any of these colors, you can see that it is just manipulating the hair color still. Right, I did accidentally do a little brush stroke there. I'm going to take that back off because notice it's still using the same selection that we had before. So as I start manipulating these hue saturation colors, I can start affecting these values. Now I do notice that I do have a little bit of hair that I'm missing here, so I can actually come right back in here to this initial selection. And if I drag my cursor over it, you can see that it's actually affecting that saturation level. So that's all for now, folks. So make sure that you work on these two images, make up those additional touch-ups as I noted, and we'll see you next time.